You're listening to Blue Please here on CynicalBrit.com with myself, Total Biscuit. I'd like to mention a few things. So, pretty much a moment of pride for Cynical Brit here, as it was, well, Blue Please at any rate, was the top WoW podcast yesterday on UK iTunes. Indeed, we're above the instance, so that's very cool. Thank you to everyone that made that happen, and hopefully we'll continue to see it. So if you want to leave a review, for instance, on your version of iTunes, if you listen to that, then that would be very much appreciated. Head over to iTunes and drop us a review. Something honest. I'm not saying, hey, go review us 5. No, I don't like that. Sycophancy sucks. You know the best thing about CynicalBrit.com is? A lot of people complained back when I was WoW Raid. It's like, oh, the only people you want in your community are sycophants. No, I want sane, reasonable people, not bleeding heart idiots, as you can find on certain other forums. But no, there's a lot of very smart people in our community, and they are willing to give constructive criticism. That's what I want. I want proper debate. I want intelligence. So leave an honest-to-God review on iTunes. Whatever you think, it's fine. Give it whatever you think it's worth. Right, let's get on with some more content, folks, because that's what we do on this show. So, there's been a comment that was made by the Blues, and it's rather intriguing. And it's on the subject of 40-man raids. So they were asked specifically regarding 40-man raids. It was a thread about it saying, are there ever going to be any more 40-man raids? So, let's have a look. See what they have to say. So, Blizzard said this: right now our plan is to look back on 40-man raids fondly as a format by which we were able to evolve and customize what we feel to be the best raiding formats for WoW. I don't believe our developers have ever stated that they absolutely will never do a 40-player raid again, but we're happy with the raid variety we have now, with 10 and 25-player raids featuring normal and heroic difficulties. The game did rapidly expand from 2004 to 2006, but I'm not sure it's safe to assume that such a growth in the size of the player base related specifically to what was happening at the end game. Well, no, I don't think it did, actually. Honestly, I don't think that was the case at all. It was more of a case of, oh, look, there's a lot of people playing this game and it's quite good. No, what kept people there was the fact that there was endgame content. That's the mistake that even modern MMOs make. There's never enough endgame content on launch. And of course, there wasn't with WoW either, but they were very quick to get it in there. So, yeah, especially for the European players. By the time the Euros came around to playing WoW, it was pretty much done and dusted. There was stuff once you hit 60. So anyway, let's continue. He said, it had much more to do with the fact that the game's overall accessibility, engaging quest experiences, and interesting lore were fantastic. It was such a growth that ultimately encouraged our desire to make the raiding game more accessible to the new types of people. So while we haven't rapidly expanded our player base over the last year, indeed apparently according to the earnings call, WoW has actually stopped growing, that's official now, we feel that in part to the updates that we've made to the end game, we see a greater percentage of players raiding now than ever before, and not just one or two of the easier raid dungeons either. We're seeing much more casual-orientated players serious about fighting the Lich King, while also seeing some of the more advanced guilds begin to work out the strategies for besting him on heroic difficulty. Our next step is to go back to the early game in Cataclysm and provide additional updates and improvements to bring it closer in line with our development experience. Today's technology, blah blah blah, it's actually got nothing to do with that, so yeah. Anyway, They come finish off with this. As a long story short, we'll continue to iterate upon the raiding game to improve it, but we feel we have a working formula right now. In order to appeal to a wider range of players, sheer numbers and the time devoted should not be the primary determining factors of success in the game. Okay. So what have we got to say about that? Back in the day, I expressed some skepticism about the move from 40 to 25, and a lot of people said that as well. I believe the basis for my skepticism was twofold. Firstly, potentially, a 40-man raid can be harder than a 25. Potentially. Why? Well, it's simple numbers. The potential for 1 in 40 people to screw up is higher than 1 in 25. Yeah? You've got 40 people, 40 of which can screw up, as opposed to 25 people, 25 of which can screw up. The second one was the impact it was going to have on guilds, which of course is a long-lost issue now. And that was the fact that they would have to cut some of their raiding core. Some of the hardcore guilds would either have to cut the raiding core, or they would have to recruit in order to get 50 active raiders as opposed to 40. To split them into two 25-man raid groups. And that was an issue back in the day. No, it really was. When Burning Crusade first launched, yes, there were a lot of guilds that had to slash and burn in that regard. But everything eventually sorted itself out. And as regards to the difficulty thing, well, there's no real way to prove it. That's the problem. Because there hasn't been a 40-man raid since original vanilla, and the game has, in some areas, got a lot harder and a lot more advanced, you can't really prove as to whether or not a 40-man raid would have been harder than the 25-mans. And I think most people will agree that things like Sunwell were harder than the stuff that you had in the original game. It's like Cthulhu versus Kil'jaeden. Kil'jaeden wins. It's as simple as that. Cthulhu was difficult at the time, but you got to bear in mind people, one, weren't advanced, and two, the encounter was buggy as sin. It barely worked. So, what about 40-mans as a format? Would I ever like to see them come back? Would indeed any of you ever like to see 40-mans come back? The novelty's kind of neat. Yeah, large actions. I mean, let me just compare this here to another game that I'm currently playing called Star Trek Online. Some of the coolest things in that game are the really large fleet actions, which consist of a large number of ships. That's neat. It's nice to be able to have that. However, I don't know if 40-man would really fit in anymore. I mean, for one thing, if you go back to 40-man, you've got yet another huge guild upheaval. That means guilds have got to recruit. Unless you've got a situation where you then have 3 modes, 10, 25, and 40, which it seems like excessive overkill. Why would you do that? Why provide 3 levels of that? Because it sounds easy. It's like, oh, well, all they need to do is change a bunch of spreadsheet parameters. No, not quite. You've got to do a lot of balancing between 10 and 25 to ensure that they're both playable, and more importantly, that if you exclusively pick one over the other, that you can do it using gear exclusively from that. That was the issue back in the day with the way that the Obsidian Sanctum was balanced, yeah? Sartharian plus 310 was back in the day not killable with only 10-man gear. It was badly balanced. Now, of course, that's since changed, and things have been sorted out. But do you really want to introduce a third tier of players? God, no. And what happens if you don't make it a tiered thing? You know, you don't bring in a mode. What happens if it's actually just a 40-man raid? Well, who's going to do it? That's what I ask you. Who is going to do that content? Not all that many people. I see the appeal, but what if you're a 10-man guild? What, you're going to get 3 other 10-man guilds together to put this together? What about if you're a 25-man guild? Sure, you can pull in your casuals and your benches, but you probably still don't have 40. You know, the average 25-man raiding guild, as opposed to the guilds which have 300 or 400 people, is not going to be able to pull in an additional 15. It's just not going to happen. Yeah, there are some guilds which are set up with 50 raiders to be sorted out for 2 groups, but then what do you do with the other 10? Do you just say, sorry, you can't bring them in? It's too big a change. You just couldn't do it. It would cause no end of drama and issues and problems. So why bother with it? What about the novelty value, though? Here's the problem. There's a lot of nostalgia attached to 40-man raiding, but there's also a lot of good stuff. No one's going to deny that Cthulhu with 40 people was a really great encounter, but you do run into the issue of redundancy with players. There were a lot of encounters back in the day that you were able to simply breeze through, have maybe 30 people awake, and 10 people could slack off and it wouldn't make a difference. Balancing around 40 people is really hard. It's harder than balancing around 25 and harder than balancing around 10. You've got to be very precise with your numbers. And think about this. If you're going to make a challenging encounter, then you've got to remove margin for error. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. The first is strict gear requirements. Now, if you've got strict gear requirements in 10, it's easier to make that than it is for 40. Because you've got to have some variance there. 40 people's going to have a bit of variance. Unless you had absolutely everybody in item level 264, and otherwise you lost, then, yeah, you got a problem there. Second issue. 40-man raids lag people's computers. Especially with the new spell effects and things like that. And more to the point, they can cause disconnect. So what happens if one of your guys disconnects and you've got a balanced encounter around 40 people? You've got to be really precise with your balancing there. What happens? Oh, the guy's wiped because some guy's internet went off? The dog ate the cable? Oh, God. What a terrible idea. Horrendous. I just don't know if it would work anymore. Would I want to do it, though? Would I want to go back into a 40-man raid? I suppose the novelty of the whole thing is pretty neat. Yes, potentially it could provide a challenge. Yes, it could be epic. It could be a massive, multi-stage encounter. It could be. Will it be? Probably not. I don't think they'd be able to pull that off. So, are 25 and 10 the optimal numbers? It's a hard question to ask, really. Both work, evidently. There are a number of games that also go around with that particular number, and there are some that don't. And say Fleet Actions in Star Trek Online can consist of a number of different players, but they're not precisely balanced encounters. They're just go in there and blow some stuff up. Their actual endgame content is 5-man. It's called Raidersodes. Now, their endgame content involves 5 people, and it's balanced very carefully around that. Indeed, it says it gives you opportunity to grab gear of the level that you're going to need in order to do those Raidersodes, and they're pretty hard. So, look at 10-man. 10-man's way more difficult to balance, and then 25-man even more so. But they seem to have done a reasonably good job of it. Now, right now, of course, 10-man content is not as hard as 25-man. It could be, but it isn't, because that's not the way they wanted to go with it. So, would they really want to go back to 40 if they're prioritizing 25? I don't think so. And I honestly don't think that anyone would really want to. There's a lot of nostalgia, and there's an awful lot of people that might say, oh, wouldn't it be great if? But generally speaking, players don't really know what they want. Players ask for all manner of stupid crap on the forums all the time. Why invest? Why invest resources into a dead raid format? If you're going to do something like that, then make an outdoor raid boss that is perhaps not really balanced around 40 people, but can involve groups of varying sizes. I think that's one of the things that they did quite well back in the original game. Those outdoor raid bosses, while you could have 40 people, you didn't need them. A lot of variance there. It's like, yes, you can have 40. And it does make me wonder, actually, whether or not scaling outdoor raid bosses would actually work. I wonder, how would that go? What would happen if, say, a raid boss scaled appropriately if you were going in with a different number of people? Maybe it's like, all right, I've gone in with 39, so it's a little bit tougher, and it's a little bit stronger, and it's got a lot more HP than it did when I had 37. But what about if I've got 40? Maybe it's a little bit stronger there. But then again, waste of resources. Therein lies the problem. You've got an issue right now where Blizzard is all about accessibility. And I don't disagree with that on basic principle. I think it's fine to allow people to experience the content, but only if they're good enough. So, introducing this additional cap where you say, oh, well, you've also got to have 40 people, and you've also got to be good enough. It's too much of a return to the way that WoW used to be. And for all I bash on Wrath, there have been an awful lot of improvements over the course of the last 5 years. I don't think I really want to go back to vanilla WoW. I don't think anyone does. We did the project, if you remember, back in the day, Arcanist Belt, when we went back and did this stuff, and it wasn't as good as we remembered, honestly. It was okay. There was a lot of reasonable fights in there, a lot of decent encounters, a lot of good mechanics, but it wasn't amazing. It wasn't the truly epic experience that I remember. Cthulhu was, but that's about it. So no, I don't think we really want to see 40-man again. I don't think even on a novelty basis should we see 40-man again. Just don't look back to that kind of thing. Learn from it and move on. 25-man is epic enough. There have been some amazing 25-man encounters. I cite as my examples things like Archimon, things like Illidan, things like Kill Jaden, things like Yogg-Saron. Really good stuff. Lich King, by all rights, is a really great encounter. They can still make great encounters, and they balance them around 25 people, and they balance them around 10 people, and they balance them around hard modes, and they balance them around normal modes. I don't think they need to balance them around 40 people as well, please. Just, some things are best left in the past. My name is Tall Biscuit, you're listening to Blue Please here on CynicalBrit.com. I've got another Frank Klepacki track for you. Go check out that album of his, FrankKlepacki.com. Go buy it, it's absolutely fantastic. It's called Cover Me, and I will be back after the break with yet more delicious content. Enjoy.